All they had heard about this hospital was criminals lived inside of it. They had also heard that the basement was completely flooded and basically the whole structure was not safe. But Paul was really convincing because he told them they were being babies. And so they said, okay, well, we'll go with you then. Once all three of them got inside and they began looking around, they were amazed at what they saw. There was all this medical equipment that had just been left out. There were even blood samples still sitting out on tables. That day, the boys explored the entire floor they came in on, and by the end of the day, they left with a couple of random medical souvenirs. Over the following few months, the boys kept coming back to the hospital and had eventually explored every room on every floor except for one, the basement. And so they decided, we're gonna go in the basement. And so they open that door up, they step inside, and they get their flashlights out because it's pitch black inside of the stairwell. They walk down the first flight of stairs to the landing, they turn around and they stop and they shine their light into the basement. And what they see is just deep, dark, murky, standing water. Paul finally says, I'm going. And he slowly walks down that final flight of stairs and he takes his first step into the water. And Tim and Max, they stay up on the landing. They're gonna let Paul go on his own first. And before long, he says he's reached the basement floor and he's up to his chest in this disgusting water. And so he looks down one way, and then he looks down the other way, and he says, you can't see down either hallway. At this point, Tim and Max feel compelled to go down there with their friend. As the boys were standing in the middle of the hallway, they suddenly hear something down the far right side of the hallway. And they shine their lights, and they realize their view's completely obstructed, and whatever's made this sound, they can't see it. They hear a massive splash, like someone cannonballed at the far end of the hallway. They immediately turn around and run as fast as they can, back to the steps, back to the landing, back to the first floor, back to the second floor, down the hall, out the window, and they run all the way back to their bikes. And by the time they're back there, they're panting, they're soaking wet, they haven't spoken yet. And they look at each other and they start laughing. It was like this adrenaline rush. It was crazy what they were doing. Eventually, Paul says to Tim and Max that they should totally go back in there and try to figure out what it was that made that sound. Eventually, after Paul called them babies enough times, they said, okay, fine, we'll go back in the hospital. They get to that access door that leads down into the basement. Paul gets his flashlight up, he turns the handle and he opens the door just a little bit and looks inside to see if anybody's in there. And there isn't, so he opens the door the rest of the way and he, Tim, and Max go inside. They make their way down to the landing, they turn around, they shine the light into the water in the basement itself, and now the water is completely calm again, there's no motion, it's still completely quiet. And so Tim suggests they throw something into the water to try to get a reaction from whatever this thing is, if it's alive. Paul, out of nowhere, takes his flashlight and throws it into the water. And as the flashlight sunk to the bottom and completely out of view because the water was so murky, there was no reaction down there. It was still completely silent. Paul turns to Tim and Max and says, the reason I threw it is now we have to go in because I have to get my flashlight. So Paul, along with Tim and Max, make their way down that final flight of stairs. They start walking into the water. He tried to use his feet to get the light up, but he couldn't do it. And so he looks at Tim and Max and he goes, I'm going under. He takes a deep breath and he goes under the water. He immediately hears the muffled screams of Tim and Max up on the surface. And as he's fumbling for his light, he feels one of them yank on his shirt to try to pull him up and out of the water. Paul manages to grab his flashlight. He comes out of the water and he turns and he sees Tim and Max booking it for the stairs. And before he can even turn around and run after them, he realizes why they're running in the first place. To his right, he can hear the sound of something huge swimming up the hallway towards him. For a brief second, he raises his flashlight and shines it down the hall, and right at the filing cabinet, this dark silhouette that's in the water, that's lying horizontal in the water, is violently swimming up the hall towards him so fast there is a wake of water coming off of it. Paul turns and runs towards the stairs, or as fast as he can go. He's trying to wade through this water that's chest deep on him. He gets to the stairs, he runs up to the landing. He can see his friends are up at the door leading out of the basement stairwell, and they're yelling for him to hurry up, hurry up. They got the door open. Paul turns the corner and runs up to that door, and right as he's leaving, he can hear whatever it was that was swimming down the hall has stopped and is now on the stairs. He goes to the access door and he and his buddies run upstairs to the second floor. They run down the hallway, they get into that room, they leap out the window, onto the shed, onto the ground, and they run all the way out to the break in the fence where they hop on their bikes and they bike away. And as they're leaving, they turn around to look and there's no one. There's no one in the window, there's no one outside on the property. Whoever or whatever was chasing them is still in the hospital. The boys believe it was an alligator living in the basement of this hospital, but they never found out for sure. While they continued to urban explore around New Orleans, they never went back to that hospital. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's gonna do it. See ya.